Something strange is happening in Japan. Every year, fewer children are being born. Right now, Japan's birth rate sits at around 1.2 children per woman. To keep a population stable, a country needs about 2.1. Japan is nowhere close. If this trend continues, the country's population will shrink dramatically with every generation. In fact, it already has. Some analysts say Japan loses roughly the population of a small town every single year. But here's the interesting part. This isn't just a story about declining births. For many young people in Japan, having children is no longer seen as a natural step in life. Instead, it feels more like a major financial gamble. One young office worker put it this way: having a child in Japan today feels like buying a luxury car or a house. Sometimes it feels even more expensive than that. Some people joke that starting a family today is like launching a startup company. Except it's a very expensive startup. Among younger generations, you sometimes hear jokes like this. It's not that I don't want kids, I just don't know if I can afford that life. It sounds like humor, but behind that joke lies a very real anxiety. Japan is often seen as one of the safest and most prosperous countries in the world. So why are fewer children being born every year? And why has something that used to be considered a normal part of life suddenly become such a difficult decision? To understand that, we have to take a closer look at how Japanese society actually works. When people outside Japan hear about the country's declining birth rate, they often offer a simple explanation. You hear comments like this: maybe it's because anime and video games are so popular. Japan's pop culture is famous worldwide. Anime, manga, games, idols. And on the internet, you'll often see jokes like, Japanese men are obsessed with fictional characters. Too many guys are herbivore men who avoid relationships. That's why people don't marry anymore. At first glance, it sounds plausible. There are surveys showing that fewer young people in Japan are dating. The percentage of people without romantic partners has been rising. And some young adults even say they're not interested in relationships. So the idea that culture is discouraging romance seems easy to understand. But there's one big problem with that explanation. If anime and gaming were the real cause, we'd expect the same thing to happen everywhere. After all, gaming culture is huge in many countries. Anime fans exist all over the world. Yet, not every country with strong pop culture is experiencing the same dramatic birth rate decline, which suggests something important. Blaming Japan's falling birth rate on otaku culture is simply too simplistic. The real explanation lies somewhere else. And to find it, we have to look at something much more grounded in reality. Daily life, what young people in Japan actually worry about, and what kind of future they think they're facing. Many people assume Japan's birth rate is falling because young people don't date anymore. But the reality is a little different. For many young Japanese adults today, even romance itself has become a luxury. Statistics show something surprising. About half of men in their 20s and roughly 1/3 of women say they've never been in a romantic relationship. That's an unprecedented level of social detachment. But it doesn't mean young people have stopped caring about love. Instead, many are choosing safer forms of emotional investment. Rather than risky relationships, some devote their time and money to oshi culture, supporting favorite idols, characters, or creators. These relationships never betray you. They're predictable, and they don't require emotional risk. At the same time, modern social media constantly exposes people to both the ideal lives and failures of others. In that environment, jumping into uncertain human relationships can feel like a high-risk investment with unclear returns. Meanwhile, marriage itself has also declined dramatically. Over the past few decades, the number of marriages in Japan has fallen sharply. People are marrying later in life, and more people are choosing to remain single entirely. At first glance, it seems obvious. The decline in social connections is leading to a decline in marriages, and in turn, a decline in the number of children. But the real issue runs deeper. When you ask young people why they hesitate to marry, you hear the same answers again and again. I don't have financial stability. The future feels uncertain. My income isn't enough to support a family. In other words, the problem isn't romance, it's reality. When people think about marriage, they imagine the future. Rent, food, education costs, job security, long-term income. And when those numbers don't add up, people hesitate. The real barrier isn't love, it's the rising cost of building a life. Ask young people in Japan why they aren't getting married. Many give the same simple answer. Living is too expensive. It sounds simple, but behind that sentence is a powerful reality. In a recent survey, 62.6% of unmarried Japanese people aged 18 to 29 said they do not want children in the future. That number shocked many observers, because just a few years earlier, the situation looked different. In 2020, the same survey showed about 44% saying they didn't want children. In just a few years, that number jumped nearly 20 percentage points. Even more interesting is the gender difference. Women reported slightly higher numbers than men. Women, 64.7%, men, 60.7%. Some commentators interpreted this as young people becoming selfish or anti-family. But the data shows something else. The number one reason people gave was economic anxiety. Among men, about 63% cited financial concerns. Among women, it was over 70%. Many also worried about career impacts. Would having children make it harder to continue working? Would their income suffer long-term? For many young people, the question isn't, do you want children? Instead, it feels like they're being asked, can you afford children? And that question carries enormous weight. Let me give you a personal example. When I graduated from university, my first salary was about $1,200 per month. After taxes and social insurance, I took home less than $1,000. From that, rent, $400. Food, about $200. Phone bill, $67. Savings. And if I wanted to save even a little money, maybe another $67. At the end of the month, almost nothing remained. Dinner with friends could wipe out what little was left. Travel or hobbies were almost impossible. And in that situation, the idea of raising a child felt unrealistic. The truth is, this isn't unusual. Many young office workers in Japan live very similar lives. And when people think about marriage, they ask themselves one simple question. Can I really support a family with this income? If the answer is uncertain, people hesitate. And that hesitation is quietly reshaping Japan's demographic future. Even if income were stable, another reality quickly appears: the cost of raising a child. In Japan, it's often said that raising one child until university graduation costs somewhere between $130,000 and $260,000. That includes food, clothing, medical care, school supplies, and education. But education costs are especially significant. Many families send children to after-school tutoring programs, known as juku, English classes, sports clubs, piano lessons, programming schools. Each expense adds up. Even with public education, raising a child through university can exceed $65,000. If the child attends private schools, it can approach $190,000. To put it another way, raising a child can feel like buying a luxury sports car on a 22-year loan. Except that car constantly demands more fuel in the form of tutoring fees and extracurricular costs. Housing adds another layer. When a child is born, many families need a larger home. In cities like Tokyo, that can become extremely expensive. Today, the average price of a family-size apartment in Tokyo has crossed $630,000. For couples in their 20s or 30s, raising a child in central Tokyo can start to feel less like normal life and more like a luxury reserved for the wealthy. As a result, Tokyo's fertility rate has dropped to 0.96, below even one child per couple. Young people haven't stopped loving children. They've simply become better at doing the math. Should they take on a massive mortgage and raise children in the city? Or should they focus on surviving financially? Tokyo today is both a dazzling global city and, quietly, a system that pushes young families out. But money isn't the only factor. Work culture also plays a major role. For many Japanese workers, work dominates daily life. A typical day might look like this. Leave home early in the morning. Spend over an hour commuting in a crowded train. Work all day. then continue working into the evening. Overtime remains common in many companies. When I was a new employee, working 3 to 4 hours of overtime every day was normal. Sometimes you get paid for it, sometimes you don't. By the time you get home, it might already be 10 p.m. In that schedule, raising children becomes incredibly difficult. And then there's another cultural element: company drinking parties. After work, coworkers often go out together to drink at restaurants or bars. These gatherings have long been considered important for workplace relationships, but refusing them can be difficult, sometimes nearly impossible. In some workplaces, declining invitations can harm your reputation with supervisors. Ironically, some people who perform poorly at work still get promoted simply because they maintain good relationships with their bosses during these gatherings. For young employees, organizing these events can also become part of the job. First restaurant, then a second bar, sometimes karaoke afterward. Occasionally, you even end up driving your boss home late at night. This culture is slowly changing, but in many workplaces, life still revolves around work. And when people are exhausted by the time they get home, finding the time and energy to raise children becomes incredibly difficult. To understand why Japanese work culture looks like this, we have to go back to the post-war period. For decades, Japan relied on a system called lifetime employment. Employees would join a company after graduation and stay there until retirement. In exchange for loyalty and long hours, companies offered stability. During Japan's economic boom, this system worked well, and many families followed a traditional model. The husband worked, the wife stayed home and managed the household. In other words, Japan's corporate system was originally built around households with a full-time homemaker. But society has changed. Today, far more women attend university and pursue careers. Dual-income households are increasingly common. Yet the structure of work itself hasn't changed much. Long hours, company transfers, work-first culture. All of these make balancing family life extremely difficult. So young people began asking themselves, can I really build a family in this system? And if the answer isn't clear, people delay marriage. And delayed marriage naturally leads to fewer births. Looking at all these factors, some people conclude, maybe young people simply don't want children anymore. But that interpretation misses something important. Many young people do like children. They smile when they see babies. They imagine having families someday. The real question isn't desire, it's possibility. Can they afford it? Can they balance work and family? Can they provide a stable future? If any of those answers are uncertain, people delay their decision. And sometimes, time simply passes. Before they realize it, the window for marriage and childbirth has shifted later in life. So the truth is simpler than many assume. Young people haven't stopped wanting families. They just aren't sure they can support one. Some people might ask, if the problem is this serious, hasn't the government done anything? In fact, Japan has tried many policies. For example, there's a childbirth grant that helps cover delivery costs. Currently, it provides roughly $3,100. Families also receive monthly child allowances. The government has expanded daycare facilities to help working parents. Parental leave policies have improved. Fathers are increasingly encouraged to take time off for childcare. These policies cost the government billions every year. Yet, despite all of this, the birth rate continues to fall. Why? Because the deeper issues remain unresolved. Short-term subsidies can help, but they don't eliminate long-term uncertainty. People still wonder, will my job remain stable? Will my income grow? Can I support a child for the next 20 years? These are not problems that one policy can solve. They are deeply connected to how society itself is structured. Japan's population crisis isn't caused by one simple factor. It's the result of economic pressures, social structures, and changing values, all tangled together. Like earphones tangled in your pocket. Pull on one problem and another appears. But if we look closely, 4 major issues stand out. First, Japan's policies often focus on supporting families that already have children, rather than addressing why people hesitate to start families in the first place. Second, society now assumes dual income households, yet work culture still demands extremely long hours. Third, urban life makes raising children increasingly expensive and isolating. And finally, demographic policy works slowly. If a country misses the right moment to act, the effects may not appear for decades. Japan may now be experiencing the consequences of decisions made many years ago. In the end, Japan's declining birth rate cannot be explained by anime culture or changing attitudes toward love. The real story is far more complex. It involves economics, work culture, housing, education, and the structure of modern life itself. Young people don't hate children. They simply aren't sure they can support them. So marriages happen later and children become fewer. Which brings us back to that first statement. Having a child in Japan today feels like buying a luxury car. Of course, children aren't products. But for many people, the decision to have them has become a major financial commitment. And unless the structure of society changes, this trend may continue. And perhaps the story isn't only about Japan. South Korea, China, and parts of Europe are facing similar challenges. Japan may simply be experiencing the future, a little earlier than the rest of the world. So the question remains, are children really becoming a luxury, or has society simply made them feel that way? If you enjoyed this video, please consider leaving a like, and don't forget to subscribe for more documentaries exploring the hidden realities of modern society.